Welcome back to Dark Side of the Mic, and today we're going to look at lavalier mics. Now, as a filmmaker who often works on their own, multiple locations, a lot of travel and need to be mobile a lot of the time, I end up using lavalier mics a lot more than really I ideally want to. They kind of become a choice out of necessity rather than pure audio quality. Lav mics are typically much noisier, much more self-noise than standard condenser mics, and that's why they're great for fieldwork, because any self-noise is usually masked or hidden by the ambience of the location you're working in. Most of them have an omnidirectional pickup pattern, so they pick up sound from all around. They tend to be quite good at isolating your voice from the background because they're only really immediately picking up the area around your mouth, around the sound source. So probably the worst place you can use a lavalier mic is in the way I'm just about to, and that's in a fairly quiet studio setup. So in that sense, we should hear all the flaws that come with these mics, but we should also be able to get a sense of which ones are better than others, or the lesser of two evils maybe. And before you get all excited wondering what lav mic is that sounds incredible. This isn't a lav mic, this is the Sennheiser 416, and I thought I'd record this introduction using this mic as a reference for the comparisons that are about to come. So sorry about that. Okay, first up we have the MOVO LV1, and this is a smartphone mic, and it's basically a clone or just a rebranded version of the Boya BY-M1. It costs about $15 to $20 and is really very cheap and inexpensive. So I have the mics, all the mics will be placed in the center of my chest for a kind of most realistic kind of use case scenario, and we're running into my Golden Age Project Pre-73 preamp. And because some of these mics will be XLR based and others will be 3.5mm or smartphone inputs, we'll just use adapters to connect it to the GAP Pre-73. So we'll use the same preamp for all the mics, and I'll adjust the gain according to what each mic requires. I don't really see the point in, undergaining any particular mic and boosting it afterwards, because nobody does that in the real world if they don't have to. So some brief impressions of the MOVO then. Seems quite fiery up top, certainly has a fair bit of presence boost there, and but I would have no problem sending this out to anybody as a kind of mail-out mic to record themselves on their phone for a podcast, for example. It'd be miles better than using their laptop or their computer built-in mic. And with something like Rode Reporter app, which I think is as idiot-proof as recording gets, this would be ideal for that and certainly very usable. But let's give it a moment of silence to get a sense of the noise floor. Okay, so not too bad there. Let's move on to the next mic. And at this point we've moved over onto the Rode Lavalier Go. Now this is the mic they recommend to use with their Wireless Go and Wireless Go 2 systems, and it works really well with those. Certainly much better than the transmitter mics that come with those systems, so it's definitely worth upgrading if you can. In terms of how it sounds, I think there's a little bit less of a airiness than what the MOVO had. That was very, very wispy in the high end. This is a bit more focused, I think. But like a lot of the mics that are on test today, you need to be careful of the SPL ratings. Generally, the cheaper mics have a lower sound pressure level rating, and this is at 110 dB, which is absolutely fine for spoken word in most general situations. But if you had a situation where the person speaking had to compete against something fairly noisy, like the sea, for example, like really loud traffic, you probably find that because they have to raise their voice, there might be an increased risk of them clipping the mic, even though your sound levels would be fine. So let's give the Lavalier Go a moment of silence just to kind of see how that sounds. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. And now we've moved over onto the Rode Lavalier. Now this system allows you to connect via the Micon system. So you can connect via XLR, 3.5mm, Shure connectors, etc, etc. So it's a much more flexible system. than obviously the Lavalier Go, which is only 3.5mm. However, I don't think the capsule in this mic is any different from the Lavalier Go system, which is $100 cheaper. So I don't see any value in buying this if you don't need the flexibility of the mic on connections. The specs on the website say that they're slightly different, but I have my doubts. I think they sound pretty much identical. Let me know what you think while we stop for a brief moment of silence. Okay, that was the Rode Lavalier. Let's move on to the next one. And at this point, we've moved over onto the Zoom lavalier that comes with the F1 recorder. And I believe this one is called the LMF2. And I think in terms of sound profile, this is characterized slightly differently. It's a lot warmer and it has a bit less of a kind of fiery nature up top. So a bit less sizzle than, say, the Rhodes. Which I tend to enjoy a little bit more. I think these mics are much more easier to EQ afterwards, and EQing lavs is something I think you really have to do. Obviously at the moment everything you're hearing from all the lavalier mics are unprocessed, but EQing them afterwards really does help get a kind of much fuller sound out of them. Let's give this one a moment of silence. Okay, that was the Zoom LMF2. And that comes with the recorder, but I think you can buy it separately as well. And at this point we've moved over to what is possibly my favourite lavalier mics that I actually own. I own a few of these ones, and these are the XX model from Naiant Studio in America. Now they've been running for about 15 years and they are handmade lavalier microphones. Now they are a little bit chunkier than your average Rode mic, for example, so maybe not ideal for hiding underneath clothing, but if that's not your main concern, then I think these sound absolutely fantastic. It's a much more full-bodied sound than what you hear with the other mics, and it's one of the few lavaliers in this test here today that I don't think actually sound like a lavalier. It sounds like a much bigger capsuled mic, and that's something I really enjoy and really value. They're absolutely wonderful to EQ, and I think they sound fantastic, really out the box, which is unusual for a lavalier mic. They come in a range of connections and sizes and lengths, all custom made to order. So if you're in the United States, I think these are a fantastic option. But let's give it a moment of silence to see what the noise floor is like. So that was the Naiant Studio XX. And next up is a mic I wasn't really going to include because I completely forgot that I had it. This, I believe, is the Audio-Technica AT831B, and I say I believe because all the paint has rubbed off on mine. It must be over 20 years old, and it's been sitting in the cupboard for the majority of that time. One thing I didn't realise about this mic is that it's a cardioid mic, so it's only really picking up sound from the front. The side and rear rejection, as I'll demonstrate in a second, is really quite significant. So if I move the mic to 90 degrees, it's on a kind of revolving lapel clip at the moment. Okay, that's the mic at 90 degrees, and you do get a sense of kind of a bit of fall off there in the sound, although you can still hear me. And if I move it to 180 degrees, so pointing all the way down, okay, that's the mic pointing all the way down, and there's even more fall off there. So really quite significant, almost like a dynamic mic. Now, as regards the sound itself, it does sound quite significantly thinner than some of the other mics, and I think that's symptomatic of it being a cardioid and not an Omni. The Omnis tend to have a bit more of a lower end response, and you can definitely hear that here. This might be useful though in situations where you want to cut out a lot of the background noise. Now lavs are generally pretty good at that anyway, but being a cardioid it should do that a little bit more. So I guess that's a little bit of the trade-off you would have to make in terms of sacrificing a little bit of low-end response so the voice is overall thinner, less natural sounding, but you would cut out more of the background. So that's something to bear in mind. And that was, I believe, the Audio-Technica AT831B. And the final mic today is the Deity V.Lav. Now this is their most low budget lavalier option designed for smartphones. So it comes with a 3.5mm TRRS connector and also a 5-meter cable. So you have plenty of slack to trail it all over the place. And the main party trick of this mic is it features a microprocessor box that works out what device you're using it with, whether it be a phone or a camera, etc. And it adapts the TRRS plug to work with whatever jack you're using it with. So in theory, you can use this across a range of devices without having to adapt special cables or plugs to make it work. So that's pretty cool. In terms of the overall sound, I think it's fairly open, natural and airy. It's not quite the same or as good as the Naiant Studio's X-X mic, but it's very, very close and I think a great option on a budget. So let's give it a brief moment of silence like the others. So that was the Deity V.Lav, and that also brings us sadly to the end of today's recording. I'm sure you're all heartbroken about that, but let me know what you think. What was your favourite out of the test today, and do you use lavalier mics? Let us know down below.